I think a stand-up comedian's career starts long before they get the courage to put the first foot on stage. As a kid, I always played dress-ups, whether it just be, putting on the professionally made outfits or, the ones that you ended up making yourself. Also, I'd ended up doing performances for my family, either of miming to records or reenacting a play or a production that my mother had taken me to. When VHS tapes became available, that just opened a whole different world up in the way of watching movies or comedy. Comedy was now readily available in the form of live shows, and you would watch Eddie Murphy's Raw or Delirious, or Steve Martin, Robin Williams videotapes, and also then audio cassettes in school. You always had bootleg copies, because you were underage, of Rodney Roode or Kevin Bloody Wilson, people like that. And at that point in TV, there was a lot of comedy on, which maybe wouldn't be on anymore, in the likes of Benny Hill or Dave Allen, Dick Emery, The Goodies. D-Generation was another one that you would sit together as a family and watch. The Comedy Company. There were a lot more comedies on TV then than what I think are now. You could write a way to different fan clubs that were in TV Week, and I wrote to Robin Williams via Mork and Mindy show, and to actually receive a postcard signed or photocopied, whatever. I mean, that was a thrill in itself. A big influence when I was a kid would have been Billy Connolly, seeing his shows or listening to them. His storytelling ways interjected the jokes, and it became seamless. So that was a style and a format that I really loved. I was lucky enough to meet him on the set of the movie Indecent Proposal years later when I was doing extra work in America. And again, just so open and honest and funny, naturally funny. The only real success I had at school would have been in things like drama or art class or media studies. All the other subjects like math or biology, chemistry, didn't really care much for. And I knew that when I was in school that I wanted to get into the arts somehow. My first work experience job was blowing up balloons on a TV show called Here's Humphrey. Being around a TV studio was really exciting. We started the school radio station. I'd be involved in the school play somehow or another, usually behind the scenes. At the same time as school, I was going to a theatre called La Mama Theatre in Adelaide. Got in a couple of productions there as well. Kept trying my hand at things, wasn't sure which way to go, and ended up being a camera operator when I left school for a production company. And while I did that, I also then did a course in audio engineering, so I had both of those things behind me when I decided to travel at 21. When I was travelling through Europe, I was writing a lot of things down. Wasn't sure the reason, but I knew they were funny or interesting, so I'd write them in a diary. And after the 6 months travelling through Europe, ended up living in the UK for a while. While I was there, I got a job as an audio engineer at a comedy club called Jongleurs for a little while, and got to watch a lot of comedians who were just starting their careers then, as well as the established ones. Again, not knowing I would do comedy, but it was an interesting time watching these guys perform. And eventually, after leaving the UK and settling in America, which is something I always wanted to do, and spend more time in Hollywood, which lucky enough I ended up doing, going to a theatre school there, as well as doing some extra work. But when I was there, I was also selling tickets for a place called The Laugh Factory. Wasn't selling as many as I was using myself, but I would find I would be watching the audience more than I'd watch the comedian, which fascinated me, the power that these comedians had on stage to make a room full of people either laugh, moan, stay silent. That was the thing that I think hooked me, was watching the audience. When I was in America, living there, doing the extra work, that was also a great time for me. I was 22, 23, got to see a lot of fantastic actors work, people that you admired and what's seen back home in Australia. When you look at things like I'm dancing next to Kevin Costner and Whitney Houston in The Bodyguard, I get to pour water for Robert Redford in Decent Proposal, as a waiter, to watch Jack Nicholson do a big monologue as Jimmy Hoffa, to walk from one side of the screen to the other in Lethal Weapon 3. And I probably find more joy out of it now, looking back at that. I was very lucky at that time to be able to experience those things. Then in 93, my brother had asked me to be his best man. So I ended up coming back to Australia, mainly because of that and maybe because of a visa issue. But either way, I came back to Australia. And so my first real public performance I would consider would be as best man at my brother's wedding, where I got some laughs. And that then gave me the courage when I moved to Sydney to get up one night at the Comedy Store when it was in a church in Glebe at that point, and then do my 5 minutes, which was a mixture of my own stuff and a mixture of old jokes to make me feel safe. When I started doing comedy, they were still smoking in all the rooms. That smell of cigarettes on your clothes the next morning or the next day just is still there. As an open micer, you had to get 5 minutes and 5 good minutes. Then you would aim for 10. Then you would aim for 15, because 15 was generally a support spot and a paid spot. So that's what you were going for. And the progression went from 15 to then 30. You could probably MC a show, and then you needed 40 plus to headline. The other thing was always to try and find 5 TV minutes. There weren't a lot of shows back on then with stand-up, sort of here and there, but no specific stand-up shows. You could do it on maybe Hey Hey at Saturday or the midday show. About 3 years in to get 5 good minutes and put it forward for In Melbourne Tonight. And it ended up doing 4 live TV spots over 2 years there in 97, 98. I look back now and think In Melbourne Tonight was shown live everywhere in Australia, or prime time, 9:30 on a Monday night, everywhere in Australia, except for the city I lived in, Sydney. They decided to show it at 1:30 in the morning for some reason. And again, you look back and think, probably should have moved to Melbourne. But I didn't. There were other live shows, Russell Gilbert Show and Rove Live. I've met some fantastic people through comedy, people that I admired when I was younger, just starting out. And even before I got into comedy, there were people that you knew were comedians from their records, like Ostentatious or Vince Sorrenti, George Smilovich, Gary Hu. The people that were pioneers in the Sydney comedy scene, I could end up watching when I was starting. And that's what you did. You sat back, you watched, you'd then go to the front bar later, they'd all be hanging around, you'd try and eavesdrop until eventually they would bring you into the circle. And again, you would just listen to these fantastic stories and experiences that these guys had back then, and to know that that may be in front of me. It was a thrill to have them let me into that circle and then learn from them. And that's what you did. You would learn from every comic working. Gary Hu in particular and myself struck up a friendship very early on. He was very supportive of different projects I wanted to do as well. And we did collaborate on a few things. Our first one was the Daz and Gaz radio show on TV. We had a lot of local musicians who helped out as well to be on the show. That was our first project. Our next thing we did, Talking Comics with Daz and Gaz. And we won the 2009 Antenna Award in Melbourne. Talking Comics was about promoting local comedians, showing their backstory as well as their stand-up. Doing comedy is great because it's allowed me to travel and claim it as a tax deduction. So wherever you travel, you try and do a show. Done shows through Asia, little clubs throughout the States I got to perform at, as well as the MGM Grand, and the Improv was another one. So they were highlights when you're starting and a young comedian. You think, how do you make money through comedy, doing club gigs? And it was going to be hard. So ended up starting a comedy club called the Laugh Grudge. To have more venues I thought would be a productive thing to have, to help both myself and comedians, because there would be rooms to work, and that's what you want to do. You only get better the more you work. So we started to do multi-nights, and it was probably one of the only other rooms in Sydney to do more than one night a week. So we did the Thursday, Friday and Saturday. That was doing okay. We ended up moving to 2 other venues before we had our own designated comedy club in Parramatta, which we established out there, which was far enough away from any other comedy room in Sydney not to bother anyone, so we thought, but it obviously did. And it was a tough time 3 years into that venture. People were trying to derail what we had established. We persevered with it. We ended up continuing where they ended up failing. Yeah, it wasn't an easy time at all. We ended up moving into the city at a location which we built up again over a few years. You really do need the right people around you. And if you've got the right people around you with the right goals or the same goals, things become better. Unfortunately, they didn't. And in the end, it ended up just, closing down. But it was can't say a fun time, but it was an interesting time. Some good, some bad times. But it's an experience. A good friend I had in comedy was Dave Grant. He verified me to other agents and other comedy rooms around Australia. That helped me get into Melbourne and also helped me get into Brisbane comedy rooms. He stayed with me in Sydney when he came up, and I stayed with him in Melbourne when I went down there. After comedy shows, we'd always sit back, watch a DVD, have a few beers and a chat, and obviously had our own dreams of what we wanted to do, and that's when we first sort of penned an idea for a film. We roughed out 20 pages, which sat there, or has been sitting there for 20 odd years. It's good to have comedy colleagues that you can run stuff by too. And Dave, I know, is a guy that I miss. Unfortunately, he did come down with pancreatic cancer a few years ago and passed away, but the film idea I've stuck with, looking to finish it, looking to make it. It'd be nice if that gets done. Unfortunately, I had another friend who also passed away through cancer, and we grew up together like a brother in our household, and he was always one that said to me that he admired the fact that I went out and did what I did, or do what I do. He said, just to have the balls to go, you know what, you have an idea, go and do it. People like that, that I know close, saw that and did like the fact that, some people do go out and just do what they want to do. In 2009, when I was separated, that again was another tough time, but I felt I was lucky enough that the cruise ship industry was going to another level down in Australia. I think it was always known as a place where old comics go and when their careers had finished, but it's changed a lot now in the fact that a lot of ships have comedy clubs on board, and you do get to do a variety of different types of shows. So you can do PG shows, adult shows, late night shows. If you can get anybody to laugh from the age of 8 to 80, or get them to laugh at the same time, that's the joy of being a stand-up comedian. My next project that I had in my head that I wanted to do was something out of Sydney as a late night chat show. I've never really understood why we don't have a lot of them. They come and go, not necessarily in that format as a late night show, but it was a product that I wanted to then put out. I knew that I could do, and ended up producing it myself and having a lot of support from behind the scenes people, as well as all my guests, because they saw there was a hole in the market. Great that it got on. Got a chance to be on the Nine Network's Go channel for a couple of series as well, but in the end, you try these things, you hope that it might go better or get a wider audience, and you think, you know what, I've got to go into my next thing. In the meantime, I've been lucky enough to have made a career out of comedy. It's been an interesting 25 years. since my first gig. It was a good time then, being able to go from open mic night to support to MC to headline. It's a good path for a comedian. What's next though?